France has quietly moved thousands of troops to every border surrounding Burkina Faso, and nobody is talking about it. Right now, as you watch this, a 34-year-old captain inside a landlocked African nation is staring down a nuclear-armed former empire that refuses to let go. This isn't about terrorism. This isn't about democracy. This is about a man named Paul-Henri Damiba, who France desperately needs back in power, and a leader named Ibrahim Traoré, who just armed his entire country with Russian weapons and told Paris to try him. What happens in the next 72 hours could either ignite the first open war between an African nation and its former colonizer in decades, or it could end the way these stories always end, with a bullet, a coup, and silence. The encirclement is complete. The weapons are loaded, and Traoré just made a move that France never saw coming. The French military has quietly repositioned forces around Burkina Faso's borders and inside the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is arming his country for what could become the most significant standoff between a former colony and its European patron in West African history. This isn't a symbolic dispute over aid packages or diplomatic protocol. This is about control resources and whether a landlocked nation of 23 million people can survive open defiance of a nuclear-armed former empire that still considers the Sahel its strategic backyard. What's unfolding right now could either ignite a proxy conflict that pulls in multiple regional powers, or it could mark the moment France's post-colonial influence in Africa finally collapses under its own contradictions. Either way, the stakes have never been higher, and the clock is ticking. To understand why French forces are now deployed in countries surrounding Burkina Faso, you have to go back to September 2022, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré led a military coup that overthrew Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba. Damiba himself had come to power just 8 months earlier by overthrowing President Marc Christian Cabaret, citing the government's failure to contain jihadist violence that had killed thousands and displaced nearly 2 million people. But Damiba's tenure offered no solutions. Attacks continued, entire villages were massacred, and public frustration boiled over. When Traoré moved against him, it wasn't just another palace coup. It was a generational revolt. Traoré, barely in his 30s, represented a young officer class that had spent years fighting in the field, watching French troops operate under restrictive mandates, seeing Western intelligence fail to prevent ambushes, and concluding that the existing security architecture was designed not to win, but to manage the crisis indefinitely. Damiba fled, reportedly seeking refuge, and Traoré took power with a message that resonated across the region. Burkina Faso would no longer outsource its sovereignty. What followed was a systematic dismantling of French influence. Traoré expelled French troops, ended military cooperation agreements, and began courting alternative partners. Russia became the most visible, but the shift went deeper. Burkina Faso joined Mali and Niger in withdrawing from the Economic Community of West Asian State Standby Force, a move that effectively split ECOWAS into pro-Western and sovereignty-focused blocs. The three countries formed the Alliance of Sahel States, a mutual defense pact that treats an attack on one as an attack on all. Traoré didn't just reject France rhetorically. He restructured his country's security and diplomatic relationships in ways that directly threatened 50 years of French strategic planning in the region. And Paris, facing the loss of not just one country, but an entire regional framework, has responded with what many analysts are calling encirclement. French military bases in Ivory Coast, Benin, Togo, and Chad now form a perimeter around Burkina Faso. Officially, these deployments are framed as counterterrorism operations, part of the broader effort to combat jihadist groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. But the timing and positioning suggest a different calculus. France maintains approximately 1,500 troops in Ivory Coast, with a permanent base in Abidjan and access to Port Bouet Airport. In Chad, despite recent political turbulence and a nominal drawdown, French forces retain operational capabilities and intelligence assets. Benin has quietly become a new hub, with reports of increased French presence under the guise of regional security cooperation. Togo, historically one of France's most reliable partners, continues to host French advisors and logistics infrastructure. Taken together, these positions create a network of launch points, surveillance nodes, and pressure zones that box in Burkina Faso from nearly every direction. Whether this is preparation for a military intervention, leverage for negotiations, or simply hedging against worst-case scenarios, the effect is the same. Burkina Faso is surrounded. This encirclement is not just about Damiba, though his fate remains a live issue. Reports suggest Damiba is either in exile or under some form of protection, possibly with tacit Western support. If France were to facilitate his return, either through direct military action or by destabilizing Traoré's government enough to create an opening, it would send a message to every other African leader contemplating a break with Paris. Defiance has consequences. But the broader objective is strategic, not personal. Burkina Faso sits atop significant mineral wealth, including gold, manganese, and zinc, with growing interest in lithium deposits critical to the global energy transition. More importantly, it occupies a geographic position that links the Sahel to coastal West Africa. Losing Burkina Faso means losing a corridor, a buffer, and a psychological anchor. If Traoré succeeds in consolidating an independent, Russian-aligned security posture, it validates the model that Mali and Niger have already adopted. It accelerates the collapse of Francafrique, the informal system of political, economic, and military influence that has allowed France to punch above its weight in global affairs for decades. Paris cannot afford that precedent. Traoré's response has been to prepare for the worst. Over the past year, Burkina Faso has embarked on one of the most aggressive military modernization efforts in the region. Reports indicate large shipments of Russian-made equipment, including armored personnel carriers, heavy machine guns, anti-aircraft systems, and possibly attack helicopters. Training programs have expanded, with Russian instructors embedded alongside Burkinabe forces. The military has also recruited thousands of volunteers into auxiliary units, mobilizing a population that increasingly views the conflict as existential. This isn't just procurement. It's a construction of a military capable of deterring or surviving a French-backed intervention. Traoré has framed this buildup in explicitly anti-colonial terms, invoking the language of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader who was assassinated in 1987 after challenging French dominance. The symbolism is intentional. Sankara is a national icon, and linking the current struggle to his legacy taps into deep reserves of popular anger and pride. Whether Burkina Faso's military can actually stand up to French firepower, especially if supported by regional proxies, is an open question. But the willingness to try signals a fundamental shift in how a generation of African leaders is calculating risk. The regional dimension is where this gets even more complex. Mali and Niger are not passive observers. Both countries have expelled French forces, invited Russian military contractors, and faced jihadist insurgencies that show no sign of abating. If France were to move against Burkina Faso, either directly or through a coalition of ECOWAS states still aligned with Western interests, Mali and Niger would almost certainly respond. The alliance of Sahel states is untested, but its existence alone changes the math. A conflict that starts in Burkina Faso could rapidly expand into a multi-front confrontation involving not just French forces, but Nigerian, Ivorian, and Senegalese troops, depending on how ECOWAS fractures. Russia would likely escalate support, not necessarily with direct intervention, but through arms transfers, intelligence sharing, and the kind of hybrid operations that avoid formal declarations of war. The result would be a Sahel-wide proxy war, with France and its allies on one side and a loose coalition of sovereignty-focused states backed by Russia on the other. The humanitarian consequences would be catastrophic. The region is already facing one of the world's worst displacement crises, with millions dependent on aid. A broader war would shatter what remains of civilian infrastructure and create refugee flows that would destabilize coastal West Africa. What makes this standoff particularly dangerous is that both sides have limited off-ramps. France cannot simply walk away without conceding that its influence in Africa is finished. Domestic politics in Paris are already volatile. with debates over immigration, security, and national identity making any perceived retreat politically toxic. Emmanuel Macron has tried to rebrand French policy in Africa, talking about partnership rather than paternalism, but the gap between rhetoric and reality has only widened. Losing the Sahel would be a blow not just to French interests, but to Macron's credibility as a global leader. On the other side, Traore cannot afford to back down without losing the legitimacy that brought him to power. His entire political project is built on the promise of ending foreign interference and delivering security that previous governments could not. If he capitulates to French pressure, whether through negotiations that restore some version of the old relationship or through a forced leadership change, it would validate the very system he claims to be dismantling. So both sides are locked into positions that make compromise extraordinarily difficult. The economic subtext is equally critical. France's relationship with its former colonies has long been intertwined with the CFA franc, a currency used by 14 African countries and guaranteed by the French Treasury. Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, has discussed leaving the franc zone, a move that would undermine France's monetary leverage and set yet another dangerous precedent. Control over currency is control over fiscal policy, trade relationships, and ultimately sovereignty. If the alliance of Sahel states were to successfully launch an alternative currency, it would deal a structural blow to French economic influence that goes far beyond military presence. Add to this the fact that French companies still dominate key sectors in these countries, from telecommunications to energy, and you start to see why Paris views this not as a regional dispute, but as a threat to core interests. Losing Burkina Faso isn't just about bases or bilateral agreements. It's about whether France remains a consequential actor in Africa or becomes a mid-tier European power with historical nostalgia but no real leverage. For Traore, the challenge is not just military but political. He must maintain domestic support while managing a security crisis that predates his leadership and shows no signs of resolution. Jihadist groups continue to carry out attacks, despite increased Russian support and aggressive military operations. Civilian casualties are rising, and the humanitarian situation is deteriorating. If Traore's government cannot deliver tangible security improvements, public patience will erode, and internal rivals will emerge. The military itself is not monolithic. Factionalism, ethnic tensions, and competition for resources could fracture the coalition that brought Traore to power. If France senses weakness, either through intelligence indicating internal splits or through visible failures on the battlefield, the temptation to intervene, either directly or by backing an alternative faction, will grow. This is the playbook France has used before in Ivory Coast, in the Central African Republic, in Chad. Identify a proxy, provide support, and let local actors do the heavy lifting while France maintains deniability. Whether Traore can prevent that scenario depends on his ability to consolidate power, deliver results, and keep his external backers engaged. Russia's role in all of this is both enabling and complicating. Moscow has positioned itself as the partner of choice for African governments seeking alternatives to Western influence, offering arms, training, and political cover without the conditionality that comes with European or American aid. But Russia's interests are not purely ideological. It wants access to resources, leverage over global commodity markets, and the ability to complicate Western strategy in multiple theaters. Supporting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger serve those goals, but it also comes with risks. If the Sahel descends into protracted conflict, Russia could find itself overextended, supporting regimes that are unable to stabilize their own countries. The Wagner Group, or whatever structure has replaced it after Yevgeny Prigozhin's death, operates with a degree of independence that can create unintended consequences. Reports of abuses, operational failures, and friction with local forces suggest that Russia's model is not without flaws. For Traore, Russian support is essential, but it is not a panacea. He needs Moscow's weapons and political backing, but he also needs to avoid becoming so dependent that he simply trades one patron for another. The broader question is what this means for the international order. The Sahel is not a peripheral theater. It sits at the intersection of multiple global challenges: terrorism, migration, climate change, great power competition, and post-colonial reckoning. What happens here will shape how similar confrontations unfold in other regions where former colonial powers still exert influence. If Burkina Faso successfully defies France and consolidates an alternative security model, it will inspire other countries to test the limits of Western tolerance. If France reasserts control, either through coercion or regime change, it will send the opposite message: that sovereignty is negotiable and that challenging the established order comes with consequences too severe to bear. Right now, both outcomes remain possible, and the window for a peaceful resolution is closing. What we are witnessing is not just a bilateral dispute between Ouagadougou and Paris. It is a stress test of the assumptions that have governed African politics for half a century. Those assumptions held that former colonial powers would retain influence through a combination of economic dependency, security cooperation, and elite co-optation. They assumed that African leaders, even those who came to power through coups, would ultimately seek accommodation rather than confrontation. They assumed that alternatives to Western partnership, whether from China, Russia, or regional blocs, would remain marginal or ineffective. Traore and his counterparts in Mali and Niger are challenging every one of those assumptions, and they are doing so at a moment when France's capacity to respond is constrained by fiscal pressures, political fragmentation, and a shifting global landscape. Whether they succeed or fail, the mere fact that this challenge is happening, and that it is being taken seriously by both regional and global powers, tells you something fundamental has changed. The next few months will be decisive. If France moves to tighten the encirclement, either through increased deployments, economic sanctions, or support for internal opposition, Traore will face a choice: escalate militarily, seek a negotiated settlement, or risk isolation and collapse. If Traore consolidates his position, delivers security gains, and deepens ties with Russia and regional allies, the pressure on France to act will intensify. The risk of miscalculation is enormous. A single incident, a border skirmish, an assassination, a coup within a coup, could trigger a sequence of events that neither side fully controls. And once that starts, the international community will be forced to choose sides in a conflict that exposes the contradictions of liberal interventionism, the limits of sovereignty, and the enduring weight of history. This is not a crisis that will resolve quietly. It is a confrontation that will define the future of French influence in Africa, the viability of post-colonial independence movements, and the shape of great power competition in a region that has been fought over, exploited, and ignored for far too long. The world is watching Burkina Faso, and what happens next will echo far beyond the Sahel.